On 12th September, Jeremy Corbyn won a stunning victory in the UK's Labour leadership election. With a landslide of 59.5% in the first round of voting, Labour gained its most left-wing leader since George Lansbury. A socialist, he won on an anti-austerity mandate, promising to end the cuts to welfare, renationalise the railways, end Trident, and invest in infrastructure and job creation. An activist, as The Independent reported, his first act as Labour leader was to join a large pro-refugee march in central London. But barely had he stepped into the role, then the British media launched a full frontal attack on the man, his sartorial inclinations, his past relationships, his failure to sing the national anthem and grovel to the Queen, and various other alleged political sins. Just as in the Scottish independence referendum campaign, where the Westminster Consensus reacted to the threat of independence with Project Fear, so in the Labour leadership campaign, the elites who had first treated Corbyn with amused condescension turned feral once they saw him as a threat. The right-wing press, as soon as they had the sense that Corbyn could actually win, went straight over the edge of sanity. Janet Daly of The Telegraph was typical warning of Corbyn supporters seizing the means of production and distribution directly through strikes and organised demands. This followed a frankly delicious outburst in which she had complained of her experience of squatters in the London borough of Haringey in the 1970s, which was somehow the fault of Jeremy Corbyn. The Sunday Times published calls for acting leader Harriet Harman to cancel the leadership elections on the pretext of a hard left plot to infiltrate the race. The Daily Mail published a delirious fantasy about Jeremy Corbyn taking office and the first days of his administration, which began, "The night sky over London was thick with choking black smoke." Invoking an indebted basket case economy torn apart between rioters, demonstrators and revolutionaries, it was practically salivating over the apocalyptic scenario it conjured up. One can't help but see in such heuristic a degree of projection and nostalgic wish fulfillment, the right-wing yearning for the old fighting days of the Cold War, when they could crush the left in the name of the free world. Even the seemingly sober Financial Times was at it, complaining of an air of menace stalking Corbyn's campaign. National socialism it was once called. One side waves the flag, the other demands a bigger state. Both rail against outsiders, the right against immigrants, the left against international capitalism. That's right, the followers of a bearded, anti-war socialist are akin to the Third Reich. The Financial Times not only reached the threshold of Godwin's law in 3 sentences, it also compared powerful multinational capital to the desperate and drowning refugees being subject to racist persecution across Europe. The right wasn't wholly unanimous in attacking Corbyn, however. Peter Oborne, an old-fashioned Tory, is an honourable exception. He wrote a piece for the Daily Mail saying he was cheering for Corbyn and defended him not chiefly on the basis of his policies, but simply on the grounds that there is something profoundly undemocratic about trying to force the political leaders to sound like differently flavoured versions of one another. But it wasn't just the reactionaries. The right-wing Spectator columnist Damian Thompson exulted in the coloratura shrieks from right-on lovies in his piece about how Corbyn's victory was a delicious humiliation for the left. Progressive Labour supporters in higher income brackets did not want Jeremy Corbyn to win today, he noted with satisfaction. He wasn't wrong. For when Project Fear turned to Project Panic, it was all too often the liberal media and liberal journalists who aimed their fire most brutally against the new Labour leadership. The first line of attack was, ironically, at the gender politics of Corbyn's victory. This line had been prepared in advance in the Guardian newspaper, which backed Yvette Cooper for leader. As senior Guardian columnist Polly Toynbee put it, Labour needs a woman leader. So when Corbyn was elected, another leading Guardian writer, Suzanne Moore, expostulated. As Jeremy Corbyn was anointed leader, not one female voice was heard. Soon Cathy Newman in the Daily Telegraph, echoing Moore's charge, complained of Jeremy Corbyn's blokey Britain, claiming that women had been excluded from the great offices of state. The ironies here were abundant. As the polling company YouGov reported in the run-up to the ballot, women who are eligible to vote are dramatically more likely to vote for Corbyn than men. Moreover, while Corbyn had committed himself to 50% representation for women in the shadow cabinet, he in fact exceeded it. As The Guardian admitted, in total, 16 out of 31 ministers, that's 52%, on Corbyn's frontbench team are women. This compares with 33% in David Cameron's current cabinet and 47% in the shadow cabinet that Harriet Harman was leading. So if Corbyn's shadow cabinet was more gender egalitarian than its predecessors, what was the substance of this attack? The argument was that the offices of leader, shadow chancellor, shadow foreign secretary and shadow home secretary were the traditional top jobs. But as Labour pointed out, this hierarchy was a relic of the 19th century when the state was more about empire and law and order than about health and education. Sometimes the line of attack became ridiculous. Anne Perkins, writing for The Guardian, stiffly told Corbyn that as a Republican he may not like the Royalist national anthem, but it is his job to sing it. The focus on such patent trivialities is the progressive mirror of the right-wing press attacking Corbyn for a consensual relationship with another politician in the 1970s, described by The Telegraph, without irony, as damaging. Nonetheless, these pseudo-progressive pundits were shortly joined by a string of right-wing Labour MPs and apparatchiks running to the right-wing press to attack Corbyn. Sadiq Khan MP, who won the nomination to be Labour's London mayoral contender thanks in part to the support of trade unions and London Labour leftists such as Ken Livingstone, went to the Daily Mail to denounce Corbyn for supposed anti-Semitism and encouraging terrorism, on the basis of Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell's placatory statements to IRA members during the peace process and Jeremy Corbyn's links to Palestinian resistance groups. He was joined by John Mann MP, who denounced Corbyn's anti-austerity agenda in sneeringly classist terms, again in the Daily Mail. In the Dog and Duck, they could understand his words. Nationalise the railways, Alf and Bert could agree with that. Sounds reasonable enough. Stop austerity, Samantha and Craig can smell a pay rise for themselves here. And of course, there was the seasoned Blairite apparatchik Dan Hodges, who in his regular columns for The Telegraph, having complained that Corbyn was even allowed onto the ballot, the Labour right has never been strong on democracy, used every possible angle to attack Corbyn, including fantasising that Corbyn's victory would be cheered by racists and terrorists. The leading Observer journalist Ed Vouliami wrote an opinion piece taking issue with his paper's stance on Jeremy Corbyn, suggesting that it had capitulated to the Blairite obsession with electoral strategy. The Tory press barons performed a script, he wrote, but we can join the chorus with our own, admittedly more progressive version. The former BBC journalist Jonathan Cook points out that this is not the first time that the Observer has let its readers down, having previously nixed one of Ed Vouliami's stories on Iraq's weapons of mass destruction out of loyalty to the then Blair administration. It appears as if their political alliance with the right wing of the Labour Party and convergence on basic ideological outlook at times comes before their commitment to journalism. But this is hardly just true of the liberal media or the print media. The entire media and the political class operate in such a closed loop of discourse that they can only interpret someone like Corbyn as an extremist and perhaps even more insidiously, unelectable. Inconveniently for this line of thinking, several polls taken before the leadership election found that Corbyn was not only the favourite among Labour Party members, but of all the candidates was the one most preferred by the public. For example, in August, the Evening Standard reported polling evidence that Corbyn was the favourite among Londoners, supported by 46% of all those who had a preference. In the same month, The Guardian reported that Corbyn was the favourite among voters from all parties. Furthermore, as Andrew Sparrow wrote for The Guardian, there are a range of issues in which Corbyn is genuinely in tune with what the majority of the public appear to want, like nationalising the railways. But when the media says you're unelectable, it isn't just a neutral statement, it is performative. It is a statement that tries to bring into being the state of affairs that it purports to describe. Take, for example, The Independent newspaper. The Independent ran a story which contained the headline, Jeremy Corbyn loses a fifth of Labour voters. There were a number of giveaways in this article that all was not as it seemed. First of all, the scare quotes in the title, which suggested that the authors were already distancing themselves from the main argument of the piece. Second, rather than going straight to the article's claim, they opened the article with reference to different statistics, stating that almost 3 in 4 people do not believe that Jeremy Corbyn looks like a Prime Minister in waiting. Third, when they did discuss the article's key claim, what they said was that 20% of Labour voters were less likely to vote Labour with Corbyn as leader. In fact, what the statistics from their poll showed was that 63% of Labour supporters were more likely to vote Labour with Corbyn in charge, and the same polarised effect was discernible among other groups of voters: SNP, Liberal, Green, even Tory and UKIP. Many who used to vote for other parties were now more likely to vote Labour. And this is not to say that all of Corbyn's poll ratings are good, they're not. But the media, both liberal and right-wing, are almost unanimously hostile to Corbyn and relentlessly spin almost every story against him. They have a lot to do with how electable he appears.